Hi everyone, it's your friendly neighborhood art historian, Adrienne Lee, back with another video. As you know, we're talking about how to read a painting, and we've been going through our introduction. This is the last video of our introduction. We've talked about the origins of reading a painting. We've talked about color, symbols, and stories in our everyday lives by looking at pop culture. And then today what we're gonna do is practice reading colors, symbols, and stories in art. How about that? Are you excited? I'm excited. Let's do this. In the previous video, we talked about the power of stories and how much humans love stories and how much we love to tell those stories over and over again, and how that is a parallel to art history, where art historians look back through hundreds of years of art to see the same stories told over and over again visually through art. So I've got 3 paintings up here for you to look at. And I wonder if you can tell what story it is. Let me point out a few things. Each one of them depicts a central figure that is a lady, a woman, dressed very beautifully. In each painting, she's holding a weapon of some sort. Here, here, and here. There's also a decapitated head in each one of these paintings, and a third figure of a female maidservant in each one. With those clues, do you think you can tell what art historical story is being told here? If you said it's Judith Slaying Holofernes, you are correct. We talked about this in our video on stories. I love putting these 3 paintings together because you can see how each artist interpreted this story with little tweaks to Judith's reaction to the story or to the act of decapitating someone. Yikes. What if I also told you that one of these is painted by a lady artist? Can you tell the difference between a painting painted by a man and a painting painted by a woman? It's gonna be a little tricky, isn't it? Or is it? Let's look. If you said this painting was painted by a woman, you are correct. Fede Galizia is the artist here. I like how she depicted Judith in a silver dress. Do you notice that it kind of looks like armor? Like she's going off to war? I think that's pretty cool. Here we've got this beautiful red drape, kind of highlighting Judith here. And what's really cool about this painting is that the artist signed her name on the blade that was used to decapitate Holofernes. That's pretty cool. All right, so already you're reading paintings. I want to show you this image. This is a painting called the Murad Altarpiece by Robert Kampen, and it dates around 1425 to 1430. It's an altarpiece. That means it's going to depict a religious scene, and you would see this in a church up on the altar. And we're going to read this painting together because it does tell a story that gets depicted quite frequently in art history, and it's the story of the Annunciation. What is that story? That's the story when the angel Gabriel announces to Mary that she is going to give birth to a baby boy, and that boy is actually going to be the Son of God. And it's a big shock because Mary is a virgin. I know. So let's look at this piece together. The people here on the left, who are these people? Well, these are actually the donors, the patrons of this altarpiece, the people who paid for it to be created. They actually get to be included. That's kind of nice, right? They're depicted as if they are watching the scene take place. They wouldn't actually be there because it's ancient, right? Okay, now on the far right, there's a gentleman in what appears to be a wood shop. He's a little bit older, he's off to the side, he's kind of in the dark a little bit. Who do you think that might be? If you said Joseph, you would be correct. He's often depicted as being a bit off to the side, a little bit older, a little bit shadowed. in a lot of pieces of art. I mean, he was going to marry Mary, and he does, but he's not Jesus's real dad, right? He's kind of like Jesus's stepdad, kind of. And we often see him in the act of woodworking as a clue that he is a carpenter, and then we know Jesus grows up to be a carpenter and that he learns his trade from Joseph. So that's kind of cool. In the center panel here, there's a lot going on. We have our beautiful angel speaking to Mary. Do you notice that she's wearing a beautiful red dress? We're going to talk more about that in future videos, just a heads up. Do you see her kneeling, reading a holy book? This is to emphasize that Mary was very studious, studying the holy books, the Word of God. Now that's interesting that it's referred to as the Word of God, and that it's a book that she's holding. It has a cloth wrapped around it, and that's interesting, isn't it? It's not just saying that she's paying respects to the book by using a cloth to hold it. There is a verse in the Bible that says that Jesus is the Word made flesh. So if Jesus is also the Word of God and he is made flesh, he dies, he's wrapped in a cloth, buried, is resurrected. So in this sense, she's kind of foreshadowing the coming of Christ and the events of the end of his life, because she's holding the Word of God with a cloth. Jesus is the Word of God made flesh. You get it? That symbolism's going a few layers there, isn't it? Yeah, for sure. Let's look at some things going on in the background, okay? We've got a lot of symbols hidden in plain sight. Artists love to do that, by the way. Here we have this beautiful lily and a beautiful vase. Lilies are a huge symbol of the Virgin Mary. They stand for innocence, purity. We have this candle that's been extinguished, and a lot of pieces of art, when a candle is blown out like that, it represents the transience of life. Life can be over just like that, like a candle being blown out. However, in this case, it's a religious painting that would be in a church, so it kind of implies that with the arrival of Christ, who is the light of the world, we no longer need earthly, physical symbols of light. It's an interesting symbolism. That's cool layers there. If you look at the image on the right, you notice there is a little niche with a shiny kettle hanging in it. That would be a kettle for water. And if you see there, it looks like it might be an area where you would wash your hands or pour the water from that kettle into a pitcher or a cup. Well, a symbol of a shiny kettle or vessel like that is often a symbol for the Virgin Mary, as she was a pure, clean vessel for the Son of God, okay? The fact that it's holding water, and water is very cleansing, the washing of the water of the Word, that kind of thing. That's another symbolic metaphor, if you will. And we have a really cool thing going on with this red arm next to this niche, if you notice. It kind of stands out because it is red. And it's not that it's just red. If you take a closer look at this arm, you will notice that there's an image of like an older man here. His eyes are closed. It's very interesting. And on this arm is a towel, if you will. And that does make sense, because if you're supposed to wash your hands here, there would be a towel here perhaps to dry your hands. But what's very interesting is that some suggest this is a reference to God the Father. Notice it's on a bright red arm here to definitely get our attention. But red is often also associated with humanity and blood. So that's interesting. And this towel here looks very, very similar to something that you might find in Jewish culture. If you look here, it definitely has a parallel to the Jewish prayer shawls. So in this case, it's definitely referencing Jesus's cultural status as a good Jewish boy, that he will be raised in a Jewish household. I think that's very fascinating and a beautiful symbolism. Now, the cool thing about art is that you get to depict things visually, but a challenge about art is how do you depict very difficult concepts visually, like the Immaculate Conception. How do you depict the fact that Mary, who is a virgin, is about to have a baby, and that baby is supposed to be the Son of God? That's a quandary, if I ever heard of one, right? This is how the artist has decided to depict the Immaculate Conception. Do you see this thing here up by the windows? Don't worry, I've got a detail. Yes, this artist has decided to depict a small baby flying in the window on golden beams of light, heavenly, if you will, and we know that it is Jesus because he is carrying a cross, and look at this, he's headed directly for the Virgin Mary. Amazing. I know. Let's look at a piece of mythological art, shall we? This is a very famous painting by Botticelli, if you will. And a lot of art historians think that there's a lot going on in this painting, and they're right. And we have all different interpretations, but I'm going to give you a few interpretations and see what you think, okay? So who's who? What's going on here, okay? So let's take a closer look. If we start here on the right, this is where our story begins. Here we have this nice lady. Her name is Chloris, okay? And she's being pursued by this gentleman named Zephyr, and he is the god of the wind. Now, he's painted blue, he's got wings, and do you notice his mouth is like puffed out, almost like he's gonna go like wind, perhaps? And he is chasing after Chloris. And he loves her, but she doesn't really love him. And in this depiction of the story, she's trying to get away from him, okay? Now, Venus, or Aphrodite, is the goddess that's front and center in this beautiful epic garden, isn't she? She's right in the center of the painting. Do you notice that she's kind of depicted in almost in a pose similar to something like the Virgin Mary or a queen, perhaps, because she's got her head tilted and she's kind of giving a sign of blessing, if you will. So it's almost implying that she's the queen in charge of this garden. Well, what Venus, or Aphrodite, does is that she saves Chloris from this terrible fate by turning her into Flora, the goddess of spring. So what we're seeing here is actually her transition, and you can see that transition because there are roses, a vine of roses coming out of her mouth, and she becomes this beautiful goddess of spring. Do you see all these beautiful red and pink roses? She's got caught in her dress. She's ready to spread out. And boy, what a beautiful garden to be in. We know that this is Venus, or Aphrodite. Do you see that the plants around her create a sort of halo? Are you seeing that with this right here? Now, this tree behind her is a myrtle tree. It's one of her symbols. And just to drive the point home, we've got Cupid, Aphrodite, her son, and he is right above her with his arrow and quiver, okay? Now, if we look at the left side of this painting, we see three beautiful ladies. These are the three graces: charm, beauty, and creativity, or grace. They are attendants to Venus, or Aphrodite, and they are the companions to the three muses. And then over here we've got our friend Mercury, or Hermes. Remember, he's a messenger of the gods. So we see him with his winged shoes. He's got a hat. His hair is free and flowing as if he just showed up here today. And he's got his stick with two snakes wrapped around it. And I love that he's kind of pointing at these clouds, almost like he's shooing them away. Now that we've taken a closer look at this painting, because there's a lot going on here. Some art historians think that this is Botticelli depicting the ultimate metaphor for beauty. And that makes sense. If you think about it, all of the figures in this painting are impeccably dressed, with elaborate hairstyles, jewels, beautiful epic clothes. They're also primarily women, and women are the epitome of beauty, are we not? And also, it's an emphasis on the beauty of nature. Scientists have actually studied all of the plants depicted in this image, and there are more than 130 botanical species illustrated here, including daisies, buttercups, cornflowers, and poppies. So this is almost like a Garden of Eden, if you will, a paradise, a utopia. I think that's pretty cool. Some art historians say that this is a metaphor for marriage, that we see Venus, or Aphrodite, presiding over a wedding, if you will, between Chloris and Zephyr here, which that marriage isn't getting off to a good start if he was trying to kidnap her, though, is it? No, not at all. However, she would be blessing their marital love, etc. If you notice that this Cupid here is aiming his arrows at one of these nice ladies, okay, so maybe it's for marriage and they're gonna be the next. I don't know, that sounds a little weak to me, but whatever. Some art historians think it's a metaphor for the month of May, a visual depiction of the month of May, the epitome of springtime. Okay, they have some good reasons for believing that. Mercury, or Hermes, is the son of Maya, after whom the month of May is named, so that's his mom. Flora is also associated with the month of May. And the three graces here seem to dance around an imaginary maypole. So that's yet another thing. And I think that's pretty interesting. So that could be an option. May, beauty, marriage, all of that sounds okay. But really, I think it's a metaphor for the Renaissance. Why would I think this is the epitome of the metaphor for the Renaissance? Well, Botticelli really believed that Florence, Italy, was the epicenter of the Renaissance, and this is kind of dedicated to his perspective that all things came out of Florence. During the Renaissance, we had a renewed interest in art, architecture, and literature. Remember, looking back at ancient Greece and ancient Rome for our models, so it makes sense to include a few gods and goddesses in this particular painting. Artists are again looking at nature for inspiration, thus all of these incredible flowers and plants and trees, if you will. But they're also looking at the human body. Artists during this time were actually visiting morgues and attending autopsies so that they could understand the musculature and depict bodies more realistically. And if you notice, our three graces wear very sheer dresses, and same with Chloris here off to the side, very sheer so that we can see the beauty of the human body. What else? In this guise, art historians suggest that Venus is taking on the role of humanitas. Love is humankind's strongest impulse, and it brings humanity to its peak of intellect and spirit. Oh, I love that. This was the guiding philosophical concept of Florentine Renaissance culture, so definitely paying tribute to their god or goddess, Aphrodite, or Venus. And it's kind of interesting because we see Mercury here and we kind of think that maybe he's shooing away the clouds of darkness. Think about the Middle Ages. Were called the Dark Ages, and he's shooing the old ways away out of this garden, this utopia. And what's also interesting is that in Christian iconography, the orange is actually a symbol of paradise in the Garden of Eden. So some suggest that these are orange trees to emphasize that maybe this is like an Eden or a utopia. However, in mythological symbolism, Venus often resides in a garden filled with trees that bear golden apples. So some think these are golden apples. Either way, pretty awesome. And I think it's interesting that it's bookended with a gentleman shooing away the clouds of darkness of the Dark Ages and a Zephyr not able to kidnap his love. She's being rescued. So being rescued from the Dark Ages and making sure they never come back, the epitome of the Renaissance. Oh, that's my favorite interpretation. Anyway, all right, let's look at another mythological story. Now things are gonna get a little weird here, okay? I'm just warning you. This is the story of Leda and the Swan, okay? What is this story? Well, Leda is the queen of Sparta, and she is bathing in the river with her maidservants. But Zeus, that darn guy, he sees her bathing. He falls in love with her. He's not in love. He's just lusting after her, of course. And he thinks, how am I going to get her attention? I know what I'll do. I'll turn into a swan. So he turns into a swan. He flies down. I guess they fall in love. They have sex, okay? And then he's just like, bye, Leda, and he flies away. We're actually seeing different parts of the story depicted here, different scenes from the story, okay? And it starts over there with Leda seeing the swan like, oh, what a frisky little swan this is. They're coupling, if you will, here in the center. They're accompanied by putti, who are playing instruments, I guess to set the romantic mood. And then she's getting dressed over there as the swan flies away. So, this version of this story is painted by Correggio. You see a beautiful Italian Renaissance landscape in the background. Do you notice it's a little bit of sfumato? It's kind of brownish, a little bit soft, you know? Really beautiful representation of a very creepy story. Here is yet another depiction of that story, Leda and the Swan. This is after Michelangelo. How do we know it's Michelangelo? If you see figures, male or female, that look really jacked, like they not only do CrossFit, but they like power lift with just genitalia stuck on like an afterthought, that's how you know it's Michelangelo. Now the original was lost, but we believe this was done by one of his students after him in his style. And we see this beautiful red cloth in the background symbolizing red passion, love, lust, and they're coupling. I'm a little disturbed by how large this swan is. And we see Leda with her crown still on her head. They are intertwined here. Let's look at another depiction. Here we have this. If you're looking at this and you think, oh geez, that has all the characteristics of a Da Vinci, you would be half right. This is actually by one of his students, one of Leonardo da Vinci's students, Cesare da Sesto. This was painted 1506, 1510, so still at the height of the Italian Renaissance, if you will. Look at this beautiful atmospheric perspective in the background. Definitely our sfumato, that kind of hazy brown color that permeates. Do you also notice how Leda here in the center has her head turned down and her very subtle kind of smile? Put this painting next to the Mona Lisa and just have at it, okay? Again, very large depiction of a swan, very human-sized, very disturbing, if you ask me. He's wearing a wreath of flowers that she has bestowed upon him. A little creeped out by the fact that his wing is around her, kind of like a, hey, baby. Ugh. right? Now, what's so interesting about this particular story of Leda and the Swan is that it doesn't stop there. As you know from our previous videos, mythological stories were often told to depict, to explain the inexplicable, right? And while this seems like a simple story between a queen and a swan, it's anything but, because Leda actually gives birth after this coupling to a pair of twins. And one of those twins, well, the twins are Polydeuces and Helen, and that Helen is Helen of Troy, the most beautiful woman in the world that sets off that series of events. So yeah, I guess she's the most beautiful woman in the world because her mom was a queen and her dad was a swan. Whatever. Mythology. What's interesting about this depiction of the story is that in this case, we see that Leda has had 2 sets of twins and that she has actually laid eggs. Yeah, she laid eggs. So, when it comes to mythology, it's good to know these repeated stories and how all of the different artists depict the stories. And it's very important because these mythological stories, they don't go away as the times change, they just evolve a little bit. Let's move into modern art for a hot minute, shall we? Can you look at this painting and guess who the artist is? If you said Salvador Dali, you would be correct. This is his painting, Leda Atomica from 1949. And because you know the story of Leda and the Swan and you've seen it depicted a few times now, you're able to read this particular painting. Now, again, it's Dali, so we have a lot of layers because he was a surrealist, okay? First thing we got to talk about is that here we have Leda in the guise of Dali's wife, Gala. Now, he painted her into a number of paintings, playing all different women from mythology, religion, history, what have you. But here he depicts her as Leda, Queen of Sparta. That's lifting your wife up, I would say. But not only that, do you see that he has actually painted her on a pedestal? Literally putting his wife on a pedestal. Now that's pretty cool. What's even more cool is the fact that if you look closely, you will notice she doesn't even sit on the pedestal. She hovers just above it. So it's not that she's just on a pedestal. She doesn't even have to sit on it. She's like floating just above it. That's pretty cool. And you could say, wow, that's Dali. He really loves his wife. But then we have to talk about the swan, right? Because the swan is Zeus, right? And Zeus is the chief of all gods and goddesses, right? So if Leda here is his wife, is Dali implying that he is the swan and therefore Zeus, chief of all gods and goddesses? Perhaps. Perhaps. We've looked at religious artwork, we've looked at mythological artwork. Let's look at a genre or moral story real quick. We're gonna read it together looking at colors and symbols, and let's see if we can figure out what's going on here. Now, this is a painting titled The Moneylender or Banker and His Wife. It's from 1514-ish, and it's by Quentin Massis, and he was a lovely Dutch artist. Now, the Dutch at this time were very strict Calvinists. They were very religious, and Calvinism is a derivative of Protestantism, or a section of Protestantism, and Protestants were setting themselves apart from Catholics at this time by not including a lot of artwork in their places of worship, okay? The Calvinists and the Protestants in general really felt like artwork was straying a little too close to idolatry, right? They felt like it was a fine line. They felt like maybe we just don't have a lot of religious artwork in our churches and places of worship. So what they decided to do was paint what they called genre or moral stories. And basically, it's like telling people what not to do. Okay, does that make sense? Think about this time, idle hands are the devil's playground and cleanliness is next to godliness. Keep that kind of thing, those kind of quips in mind when we're looking at this particular painting, because it's trying to teach us a story here. So here we have our banker or moneylender. Next to him is his wife. Now he is in blue and she is in red. And what he's doing here is he's weighing some gold coins using a scale, okay? And what is in front of the young lady? It's actually a holy book. It's almost as if she's supposed to be reading and studying her book, but she looks like she's a little bit distracted, doesn't she? So what some of the things are in this painting that make us think of what not to do is there might be this suggestion, hey, don't be distracted by the things of this world, like gold coins, beautiful objects. Here we have this crystal chalice here. We have a bag full of pearls, and she seems to be kind of distracted from it. So maybe the artist is saying, hey, don't be distracted by the things of this world. They don't last. Focus on your holy book, making yourself a better person and studying your faith, okay? It could also mean, hey, Mr. Moneylender, be accurate with your measurements. Don't cheat the person that comes to you with their money just because you have these beautiful objects. Don't try to make a little extra off of them. Don't try to cheat them. Be balanced in your scales and in your measurements, right? And what's very interesting is what's going on in the background of this painting, okay? Let's take a closer look. Do you notice that the door to this room is open and there are two people back here and it kind of looks like they're gossiping, right? There's a lady pointing and she's like, blah, 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 blah. Who knows what they are saying? But it's definitely a suggestion that, hey, people are always watching. People are always looking over your shoulder. You have to lead a positive example, lead a good life for others who are watching you. And another cool thing, do you notice that there's a convex mirror here? Do you see that? It's a mirror that's reflecting a window that we, the viewer, don't see, the way it's aimed. And what's interesting about this window is that the beams in the window make a cross. Now that's interesting because the artist might be saying, not only can people see you and gossip about you and see your actions and talk about you behind your back, but remember that Jesus, Christ, is always watching, and he is the light of the world, light coming through the window. He is always watching, so do what's right because God always sees what we do. That's pretty cool, right? So to drive the point home, the original frame for this particular painting had a Bible verse etched into it, which went like this: "Ye shall do no unrighteousness in judgment, in meat yard, in weight, or in measure. Just balances, just weights, a just ephah and a just hin shall ye have. I am the Lord your God." And that is from Leviticus 19:35 through 37. So this artist might be saying, hey, the only way to get through this life is to keep everything in balance. Secular versus spiritual, keep everything in balance using scales. And remember, in a lot of religious faiths, when you die, your soul is weighed on a set of scales, right? Do you go to heaven? Do you go to hell? That kind of thing. So keeping that in mind, this was a painting to instruct us to always keep our lives in balance: the good, the bad, the secular, and the spiritual. Now, this video concludes our introduction to how to read a painting. The next few videos are going to be very in-depth, and we'll be looking at color specifically. It'll be an intensive look at color in art. Part 1 will focus on the colors orange, purple, and green. Part 2, red. Part 3, yellow, and Part 4, blue. We're gonna have the most amazing, exciting, wonderful, fun time. So I hope that you will join us for these upcoming videos. If you've been enjoying these videos, maybe throw a couple of coins in my virtual tip jar. Otherwise, if you could like this video, maybe share it, maybe subscribe to my YouTube channel, maybe let people know if they're interested in learning about art that these videos exist, that would be awesome. And thank you so much for tuning into these videos. I will see you next time.